Hey guys, so today's video is going to be a comparison video about medical school and pharmacy school. So this is a video that I wish that I had seen before I applied to pharmacy school. And basically that's just because I didn't know what options there were in healthcare before I applied to pharmacy school. So this like way back in college I'm talking about. So, I think a lot of us kind of back in high school, maybe in college, we think that like, oh, I'm pretty intelligent, I like science, I might as well be a doctor. But I think a lot of us kind of fail to do research on all the different areas in the medical field that we can go to. So I honestly didn't know much about pharmacy. I knew that there were pharmacists, but I just thought they counted pills behind the counter and that was it. And I really wish that I had known what a pharmacist does compared to what a doctor does, because I think that would have steered my direction better when I was younger, instead of kind of trying to figure it out after I already graduated college and all of that stuff. So that's what this video is about. Let's just get started. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is what each does. So what does a doctor do? What does a pharmacist do? So a medical doctor, there are two different types. So you can either be a doctor of allopathy or doctor of osteopathy. So you can apply to two different schools. Osteopathy is the exact same thing, but you're looking at the patient-centered care. So it's more of the full body, and not just treating symptoms, but actually looking at the full body and what's going on there. But basically, a doctor, you know what a doctor does. You go to the doctor, they, evaluate you, listen to your symptoms, diagnose you, all of that stuff. You can specialize as a medical doctor, so you can be just a general practice doctor, you can be an oncologist, a surgeon, a podiatrist, I don't know, whatever you want to be. There's many different specialties in medicine that you can do. For pharmacists, you can also specialize. So a lot of people don't realize that. They just go to Walgreens or, Target, and they see their pharmacist and they just think they stand behind the counter and count pills, but that's not all that they do. Pharmacists are also part of that healthcare team. So there's pharmacists in all different areas. You have them in the hospital, you can have an oncology pharmacist, a veterinary pharmacist, you can have ambulatory care, which is, kind of like outpatient care. And they kind of oversee the patient's whole health and direct them in what like medication is good for them, for their body, for their, health issues and all of that. So they kind of work with the doctor. So it's more of a team. So that's kind of the difference between the two. A lot of people, again, just think that pharmacists are just dispensing and they don't want to do that. And that's what I thought when I was in college, but they definitely do a lot more than that. So if you're interested in kind of working as a healthcare team, or on the side that sees kind of what the drug does to the patient and following their course of medication, you might really like pharmacy better. Whereas for medicine, if you like more of that biology in college, the anatomy, that kind of stuff, the broken bones, the blood, the guts, you might like medicine better. So I definitely found out that pharmacy was a much better fit for me, because I'm not all about that blood, guts, ER, stressful, kind of stuff. I definitely like the pharmacy side better, but that's just me. But you might be completely different. But that's the difference between the two. Okay, next thing I want to talk about is admissions requirements. So obviously when you're in college, you're trying to fulfill those requirements so that you get into the medical school or pharmacy school that you want to go to. The requirements are actually very similar. Medical schools may require a bit more biology, a bit more anatomy, whereas pharmacy schools might require a bit more chemistry. But overall, most of them are very similar. You also want to see if you need a bachelor's degree or not. I think a lot of medical schools require a bachelor's degree, but not all pharmacy schools do. So you definitely want to look into that. But yeah, so if you're looking at like college majors and your school doesn't have like a pre-pharmacy or a pre-med, if I was going to medical school, I would probably do like a biology major or, molecular microbiology, like something in that area. And if I was going to pharmacy school, I'd probably do chemistry or something along those lines. You're also going to need physics. Those critical thinking science courses they really want you to have. And then of course you're going to have like your economics and stuff like that, but it's all school specific. It really is. You can't just say I need all of these for medical school and I need all of these for pharmacy school. So make sure you go on the websites of the different schools and kind of make a list of everything you need. But definitely focus more on chemistry if you're doing pharmacy, because you're going to be using that a lot more. And then you also need to take those admissions tests. So if you're going to medical school, you need to take the MCAT. If you're going to pharmacy school, you need to take the PCAT. But again, not all pharmacy schools require the PCAT. So, like my school didn't, which was awesome because I've been out of college for several years and I forgot a lot of my organic chemistry. So that kind of worked out in my favor, but some schools do require it. So it really just depends on the school. I'm pretty sure that all medical schools require the MCAT though. Not 100% sure on that, but I am pretty sure because I haven't heard of anybody going to medical school without taking the MCAT. So I would look into that. But those are the difference in the admissions requirements. Pretty similar, just kind of a different focus on your science courses. Okay, next thing is education. So for medical school, after you get in, you have 4 years of medical school. So I believe your first 2 years of medical school are just hitting the books, your general book chemistry science courses, and then your last 2 years are rotations. For pharmacy school, it's also 4 years, but your first 3 years are your book work classes, your actual classroom classes, and then your 4th year is your rotations. But for pharmacy school, we also do IPPEs, so that is after your first year, or some schools do it during your first or second year. You do like introductory rotations, so really easy basic rotations just to get into the hospital, but your actual like full-time rotations aren't until your 4th year. So that's the difference between medical school and pharmacy school. Medical school gives you a longer time to explore your different specialties and to be hands-on, whereas pharmacy school is a bit more focused on the books for longer, because we have to really know all those mechanisms of how the drugs work. So I think that's why the pharmacists kind of need that longer time to hit the books, whereas the medical doctors kind of get more out of being in the hospital, being around patients, kind of working on their diagnosing skills a little bit more. And then as far as after you graduate, so both careers have residencies and things to specialize. For a medical doctor, you are required to do a residency. So you have match day, you have to have a residency, no matter what your specialty is. For pharmacists, we don't need a residency. So if I wanted to go work at a Walgreens or CVS or just a regular community pharmacy, I don't need a residency. I can just go and apply and get a job. But if I wanted to specialize in like a hospital or, oncology pharmacy or something like that, then I would need to do a residency. Medical school residencies are typically, I think, 2 years till up to 8 years or more even, depending on what you want to specialize in. Pharmacy is a max of 2 years. So you are really in your field working pretty quickly for pharmacy compared to medicine. So, that's something you want to look into as well. For a doctor, right after you graduate medical school, you're still looking at several years of residency before you can really be that attending doctor, and your pay also is much lower as a resident. For pharmacy, I can graduate school and start making my full salary if I don't do a residency. Residencies, you make a lot less money. But that just depends on what you want, because after you specialize, then obviously your income is, balanced out. But so that's something to keep in mind if you're a little bit older, maybe. For medicine, it takes a long time to be practicing in that field, making your full salary. Whereas pharmacy still takes a while, but after 4 years, you're a full-fledged pharmacist and you're making your full salary. So that's something you want to think about. Okay, specialties. So I kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but I didn't go into much detail. Each profession has specialties. So as a doctor, everybody kind of knows what specialties a doctor can do. So you can do surgery, general practice, oncology, geriatrics. There's just a million different things you can do as a doctor. As a pharmacist, you can also specialize. You can specialize in veterinary, you can specialize in oncology, pediatrics, whatever area of pharmacy you want to specialize in. And it's a growing area of practice. So medicine's kind of been established. They kind of have their areas already established, whereas for pharmacy, it's still growing, which I think is really cool. And a lot of these specialties are pretty new. So, but you definitely have them. So if you think, oh, I don't want to be a pharmacist because I'm just going to be stuck, in a community pharmacy and that's it. That's not true. You can work in so many different areas. It's kind of insane. You can also work with like the FDA, work with the government, in, doing like screenings, making sure the drugs on the market are still safe and conducting research and stuff like that. So a lot of different areas you can go into, kind of whatever piques your interest. But definitely look into, the different areas you think you want to go in, and, do I want to be that doctor on the side of the bed, or do I want to be the pharmacist looking at um, how the body is metabolizing the drugs and things like that. Okay, finances is something I want to touch on, because I think a lot of people, when they go to medical school or go to pharmacy school or any, professional school, are concerned about the finances. Um, Tuition is very similar between medical school and pharmacy school. You really have to look at each school because each school is different. But I did one quick look on one school that I was just looking at, and the tuition is very similar. It only differs by maybe $5,000 a year, which is a lot of money, but in the scheme of how much these schools actually are, like 30,000, 25,000, 5,000 isn't a big chunk. So just depends on the school, all that stuff. I think my school has the tuition is very, very similar. So it doesn't cost that much more to go to one over the other. But again, research the school that you want to go to. And then afterwards, the money that you make when you're in the field, I think as a medical doctor, you definitely can end up making a lot more than a pharmacist, just because of the specialties that you can go into. Some doctors can make up upward of $500,000 a year, plastic surgeons and all that kind of stuff. Pharmacists, typically, when you start working like retail, you can out the gate start making $100,000 a year, and that's right after your 4 years of pharmacy school. And then if you become a manager, or if you specialize, it just goes up from there. So that's something to keep in mind as a medical doctor during your residency, which you have to do. You're probably only going to be making $30,000, $40,000 for that. Whereas, and that's right after medical school. So that can be for 2 to 7 years, however long your residency is. Whereas for pharmacy, you might do that residency for like 2 years, making $30,000 or $40,000. And then you start making the big bucks after those 2 years. Or you can make the big money right out the gate. So medicine, it takes a little bit longer to pay off that debt that you're gonna incur in pharmacy school or medical school, it doesn't matter. Whereas pharmacy, you can pay it off a little bit faster because you start making money a little earlier. Okay, lifestyle is something else I want to talk about. So I think a lot of people are pretty much aware of the scheduling of a doctor versus a pharmacist, but you really have to think about what kind of lifestyle you want. So do I want a job where I'm going to be working in a hospital for 12-hour, 24-hour, 48-hour shifts? Or do I want a job where it's more 9 to 5, I'm home, I can have a family? So, that's something to consider. For medicine, you can definitely have both, you can do, a general practice where you're just, not just, but where you're like a family doctor. So you have more of a 9 to 5 job, as compared to a surgeon, who would be in the hospital for long hours constantly. Pharmacy, you can also have both, but I think in the general scheme of things, it's a very much more stable job. Not stable job as in terms of like employment, but it's more stable in terms of your hours. So, most pharmacies have set hours that the pharmacist works. And so that's something that definitely appealed to me, because I'm not somebody who's going to be staying up late, 12 hours, like, no, and I want a family. You have to kind of think about, weigh out what you want versus what isn't as important to you. So that's just kind of my take on it. I definitely really like the appeal of a more set hours, a more 9 to 5 kind of job. So that's just what you want. So kind of think about that before you decide which school you want to go to as well. Okay, last thing I want to talk about is research. So no matter which school you go to, you can graduate and conduct research. So if you're somebody who's not super like people person-y, like you don't want to be with patients all the time, you don't want to work retail pharmacy or community pharmacy, then you can do research. So if you're going to medical school, you can do more of that medical research, or you could be a medical examiner. For pharmacy, you could also do compounding. So if you are interested in like creating new drugs and seeing how they could affect the body, that is something you can also do. So think about that if you want to be more in the research side of it. Pharmacy, if once you graduate with your PharmD, you're focused on the drug and how the drug works in the body and the most effective dose and all of that kind of stuff. Whereas medical research is more like just kind of general. I feel like it's not so specific on the actual drug, the mechanism of action, and all that stuff. So think about that if that's something you want to do as well. Okay, so that is my comparison of medical school versus pharmacy school. So hopefully that helped you kind of pick one and decide what you want to do. Again, I wish I had this when I was in college, because all I really knew was medicine. I didn't know pharmacy was really an avenue that I might want to go down. And I think a lot of people get stuck in that. I'm going to be a doctor. I'm going to be a doctor. And they don't realize that there's other avenues in medicine that aren't doctor. So I think it's really good to, really explore your options. So hopefully this helped you a little bit. If you have any questions about either pathway, either medicine or pharmacy, or if you have just kind of any tidbits you want to share, go ahead and leave them in the comments below. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. And I will see you in my next video. Bye.